Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Creed 3 making a franchise record opening weekend, being called by Deadline a game changer for Amazon Studios. But what does this actually mean, and what are the numbers that we are looking at, and how do they compare up with the previous films? Because there is definitely some interesting play on numbers happening here, because people may have forgotten this, and I actually forgot this in my Geeks and Gamers video. I had to add something in after the fact, but the fact is that for Creed 1 and Creed 2, they both opened during Thanksgiving, meaning they had a couple of days extra time to make money, and so really it's not even that fair of a comparison between the three opening weekends, because much money was made by the first and second Creed movies during that Wednesday and Thursday prior to the weekend. And that's the reason why when I'm looking at the numbers, I think to myself, does this really actually reflect an increase in the franchise, or is this basically showing us that it's making about the same amount as what we had seen in previous films in their opening frames, right? Obviously, it's not necessarily the fairest thing to say, okay, well, this film gets 4 or 5 days and this film gets 3 days, but ultimately it comes down to how many people are actually going to go see it during the actual frame that it is being released in. And so I think ultimately it is the fairest thing to compare them, and to compare them specifically in what did they do during their actual opening, whether that be the full Thanksgiving opening or whether it just be a 3-day opening, because no matter which way you change it, no matter which way you adapt it, it doesn't really give you the full picture. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania and how it's holding up against the previous films of the franchise, because remember, just like they are saying here with a franchise record opening, Ant-Man and the Wasp had the same thing and ended up having a massive drop-off. Now, I don't suspect that Creed 3 will have as much of a drop-off, though I personally think that it should, because I don't think it's very good. Regardless of that, I honestly just do not see that happening. But will it have a massive drop-off? We won't know that until next weekend, and that will ultimately be the telltale sign of whether the film is going to be the highest-grossing film of the entire Creed franchise, and whether or not it's going to be able to make its money back. Before going any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, loud that fire button if you're watching on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with the bell notification on. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. Also, reminder that next Sunday we will have our 5th annual Wednesday Raven Awards, where we talk about the best and worst films of 2022 as voted on by you. And you have about a week, less than a week actually, to get your votes in, because this Friday, after Friday Night Sights, I will be closing down the ballot. So check out the pinned comment below if you have not yet voted for the best and worst in movies in 2022, amongst many other fun categories. Last night's stream, I was able to go down some of the categories and some of my favorites. And so if you want to find out more about that, you can check that out, and also check out previous year's shows and see what we are in for. Also, of course, there's the show where I announced the nominations, though it is blocked apparently in some countries because of some of the footage that I used. All right, diving into the numbers, as you can see from our buddy Tony over at Deadline, Creed 3, $58 million+ opening, franchise opening. Yes, for a 3-day opening weekend, you would be correct, Tony, but you're also forgetting and kind of leaving out the fact that the other two Creed films actually had, when you adjust for inflation, just as impressive numbers, because they actually opened up much earlier, because they had the Thanksgiving holiday and the Thanksgiving frame. Now, it won't really be able to tell. We won't really be able to tell until, again, second weekend, weekend 3, exactly how much impact that's going to have ultimately and overall, as far as where this film will actually really compare. It's really a not fair comparison in either regard from either Creed 1, Creed 2, or Creed 3's perspective, but I'm just so sick and tired of the people running with these narratives and leaving out some very important details. As it goes on to say, at this level, Creed 3 stands to also become the highest grossing Creed title stateside at $150 million, besting Creed's $109.8 and Creed 2's $115.7, while also providing a lot of lift to a domestic box office looking to return to pre-COVID levels. Ah, yes, continuing to mention COVID. So I'm assuming that is trying to say that this is the highest debut ever for a sports movie, and at this level, it is looking like then the film will be able to make, at least according to them, $150 million domestically. But that is actually even more telling, because if that is the number that they're going to go with, you take 109.8 and put that in with the inflation from 2015, and Creed 2's 115 and put that in with the inflation from 2018, guess what? That 150 becomes a lot less impressive, especially when you start to factor in average ticket price, etc. We'll talk about that and go into that in a second. By the way, I'm not just going after this film because I don't like it. I'm going to be going after John Wick 4 as well, because they're already talking about this, saying that Chapter 4 is going to be the record-breaking opening. But here's the thing. opening weekends do not tell the entire story. So I'm going to be tracking not only its opening weekend, but also doing what Tony and others like him don't do, which is adjust for inflation, but also I will be following it and its subsequent days to see how it actually adds up to those previous films. Is it actually going to be able to do it? Now, I think the John Wick franchise is awesome, and I love all the films within it, but guess what? I'm going to treat it just like I would any other film. As you see right here from the international box office from our girl Nancy over at Deadline, Creed 3 has knocked out with a knockout with $100+ million opening global weekend. But what do these numbers actually mean? Well, first off, let's talk a little bit about these ticket sales, because this is kind of grinding my gears just a little bit. So here's the thing. First off, when you actually look at the first Creed movies, what you'll notice is that when you go to a site like the numbers or any other place, when you look at their opening weekend, domestic opening weekend, they'll point out that, Creed 1 only made 29.6, Creed 2 only made 35.5, whereas Creed 3 sits at the top with 58.6, and that is indeed true. When you adjust for inflation, the numbers change, just a little bit. As you can see, then Creed 1 jumps to 32, Creed 2 jumps to 35, and of course Creed 3, since that is the current year, is still at 58. But what these films leave out, and this is something that I thought was a discrepancy at first, but then it made more sense when I recognized, these movies, Creed 1 and Creed 2, both opened over Thanksgiving. So notice that the domestic, the domestic number right here, 56.3, when adjusted for inflation, right, when you look at this number rather, is not that far off from the $58.6 million here, right? Or the $45 million that it was made by the first Creed film, right? And when you take away again, those numbers there, you'll notice that this film, right, they don't actually adjust for inflation at every single point in time, or at the very least, there may actually be a mistake in these comparisons, right? Because these numbers change for inflation, but for some reason, these dailies don't seem to be impacted, because you're still seeing that same 56 and that same 42. Also, they also tend to use a little bit of a different number, right? So they're showing a slight increase overall, but their numbers are not, again, the numbers that they use for inflation. Again, I think that they're using it to be on the safe side by having it be a specific quarter of the previous year for inflation to try to make it fair, is my best guess. But ultimately, we look at this and we have to think to ourselves that, okay, there might be something more going on here that needs to be kind of uncovered. Because when I broke these numbers down and put them into my chart right here, I said, and based off of the numbers that they were reporting, is that if you take the $42 million that had been made, again, by the end of its run on Sunday, the first Creed film actually had a $53.9 million opening weekend. The second Creed film had around a $67.7 million opening weekend. And ultimately, when you take those things into account, that $58 million becomes a lot less impressive. You then add on top of that the fact that you have these adjusted for, rather you have, again, the comparison of the ticket sales, and you're seeing very marginal increases across every year. Yeah, you see about 1 million more tickets for Creed 2, but between Creed 2 and Creed 3, you really don't see that much. And remember that for all three of these films, these are just, again, the average ticket price for that given year. This is not the average ticket price for that given film. And Lord knows with Creed 3, most of those tickets that are being sold are probably coming from IMAX screens and coming from other premium format screens. Probably the same could be said for Creed 2. Same for the first Creed, probably to a lesser degree. There's obviously a lot more premium screens and premium formatted offerings this time around. But ultimately, this shows that the numbers really aren't as impressive as they are trying to make it out to seem, right? If you do compare the opening weekend to just the first, again, Friday to Sunday numbers, yeah, there's obviously going to be a bit of a discrepancy there. But once you, again, recognize, oh, wait a minute, but by it's Sunday, these films were actually much stronger. And so when you take those things into account, you start to recognize and realize very quickly that, oh, wait, yeah, something's not quite right about these overall numbers. Let's go ahead and dive into the full box office chart for the week, though. Creed 3 obviously coming in at the number one spot with $58.6 million. Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania coming in at number 2 with a $12.4 million. Another 61% drop. This film saw a 70% drop week 1 to week 2. 2 to 3, 61%. This film is dropping like a light. So there's actually a decent chance for this film to, again, barely cross 475, let alone get to $500 million. I still think it's possible because it is a Disney film, it is a Marvel film, and the Marvel fans will, are still, cult-like enough to be able to show up for movies like this to at least get it to that point in time. But let's just say that, especially if you go by the $600 million break-even point that some people are going by, things do not look very good for this or for any other film. And when you take into account especially just so many less tickets being sold for this film versus the previous one, ones, it is just, again, night and day. In fact, going ahead and looking at those comparisons, remember, they spent an extra $60 to $70 million, whether you compare it to the first or second Ant-Man films, and we are now starting to see, right, not only, right, the numbers going well below that of the second Ant-Man and of the first Ant-Man film when compared in its first week and its first run, but then look at these weekend numbers here. Yes, you do see a slight increase in the numbers, but not by all that much. And when you then also look at the second weekend numbers, look what you see again. You see a massive drop-off, and then you see, again, the weekend numbers instead for the third weekend actually end up going to Ant-Man and the Wasp, from that not too long ago. And that also itself was not too far off from where the first Ant-Man film, in fact, it did a little bit better. So this film, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, is actually doing a lot worse. And so do not have to wait. You do not have to wait very long for eventually Ant-Man and the Wasp to be able to catch up to the numbers here. And that is, I think, something that should be very concerning for them, because Ant-Man and the Wasp ended at 627. Ant-Man ended at 564. At $419 million with this film, already pacing far behind that movie, even though it did get a bit of a jump start technically with a number like this. Yeah, let's just say it's not looking very good for the prospects for Quantumania, and that could also be an indication early on of the prospects for the MCU going forward as well. Going into the rest of the charting here for this weekend. Lost my place there for a second. Cocaine Bear came in at the number 3 spot, dropping 53% in the second week of its release. So a pretty good hold there, but not as strong as it could have been. This film actually is not going to make nearly as much money as I think some people would have suspected. Had a little bit of a higher production budget than probably they should have spent on it. It doesn't sound like the money was well spent either, from what I'm hearing about the CGI bear and just how it's not very well done. Some people have found it funny, some people have not, but it looks like this movie is still going to be able to eke out making some money, which, hey, I guess that's the best that someone like Elizabeth Banks could hope for, seeing that one of the last major films she did was a pretty massive flop in Charlie's Angels. Demon Slayer, I know that there's some Demon Slayer fans out there from Crunchyroll, $10.1 million here, opening stateside. Jesus Revolution, the top 5, once again, $8.6 million in its second week of its release, only a 46% drop. This film, much better position than Cocaine Bear because it didn't cost as much. Both films likely to break even, but looks like Jesus Revolution probably will end up making a little bit more of net gain profit. Avatar: Way of Water also continuing to hang around, but it's also just not doing much day to day. So this film is pretty much done as far as the numbers are concerned. It is adding on money every single week, every single day. But again, 12 weeks out from its initial release, and it's getting well below $1 million per day. I mean, again, it kind of goes back to what I've been saying previously, that people are going to see this when they actually have the time to actually go and see it. Operation Fortune, a new film from Guy Ritchie at $3.1 million. This film actually had an early release in many other countries, and it actually had a much higher production budget than probably it should have had, and the chances of this film actually flopping are pretty high. I've heard some pretty good things about it. I do like me some Guy Ritchie films, especially his more recent films like The Gentleman and Wrath of Man. I'm looking forward to The Covenant that he has coming out a little bit later in the year. But Operation Fortune looks like it could be a lot of fun. $3.1 million. Sad to see, though, that this may not be enough to pull it to the break-even point. Coming in the number 8 spot is Puss in Boots, $2.7 million. Still hanging around as well after 11 weeks, continuing to add on to its profits. Magic Mike's Last Dance, continuing to drop off like a light. Not likely going to make any of its money back. And then 80 for Brady, also in a very similar situation. 5 weeks out from initial release, starting to bleed theaters in both these cases. Things not looking very good for all of those films. Looking at the worldwide numbers, Creed is indeed at $100.4 million. You then look to Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania at $419.4 million. And so I bring that number up again because if this film is dropping off already like by a light, and next weekend it's probably going to be in the single digits for the weekend numbers, and it's just got more and more competition coming every single week, and that's just domestically but internationally too. You're looking at these numbers here and you're thinking to yourself, oh man, could this film actually struggle to even get to $500 million? Again, I do have it within the charting that I did for this movie that there is a potential for this film to actually lose a little bit of money. If you add on top of that the potential that the film costs a lot more than, or rather that the break-even point is a lot more than even what my more conservative estimates have, yeah, let's just say this film is not in a good position no matter which way you look at it or which way you spin it, especially when you compare it to the previous films in the franchise and you adjust those numbers for inflation. It's just not impressive, and it's going to end up likely, in fact, I will go ahead and say confidently, this will be the lowest grossing film of the entire Ant-Man franchise because I don't see how it could possibly catch the $564 million of the first movie. It doesn't have the numbers. It's not likely going to do that. It might be able to pass up the domestic numbers of the first Ant-Man film, but internationally, it ain't going to be able to do it. Cocaine Bear at $52 million worldwide. Demon Slayer, $22.4 million. Jesus Revolution at $30.5. Avatar Wave Water at $2.2 billion. Still the highest grossing film of 2022, but will not be able to catch the $718 million made by Top Gun Maverick as far as box office at the domestic market is concerned. As you can see, Operation Fortune did have a $20 million already made $20 million internationally, made $3.1 million. So that's not a terrible opening for a film like this. However, again, $50 million production budget means it's only made 0.5 times its budget. So not a very good showing there, and that's sad because I do like Guy Ritchie films, and I want to check that one out. $453 million for Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Magic Mike's Last Dance at $53.3 million. 80 for Brady at 38.3, and I accidentally clicked a box there. Going into some box office charting because we like to do some charting here on the channel. We'll go ahead and look at these numbers for, first off, Cocaine Bear. So $52 million means I'm projecting the film to make somewhere between $74 and $104 million when all is said and done, meaning that it's either going to lose $3 million or make as much as 14. So it's looking like this film has a pretty good shot. It's only at -16 right now. Pretty good shot of this film making its money back. Same also can be said for Jesus Revolution, which I'm projecting to make somewhere between 3 and 14 million. So as you can see, very similar numbers here. The only difference is that I have Cocaine Bear as a possibility if it just the wheels fall off of it, which, you know, it didn't have the best hold from week 1 to week 2, but definitely not terrible enough. So if it continues to have that similar trend of drop off, then similar rate of drop off, I should say, then the chances of it breaking even are actually pretty high. And I would not be surprised for that film. Jesus Revolution, I would say, is pretty much guaranteed. It's at -4 right now. So it'll make a little bit of profit, but again, not the biggest money maker in the world. At $419 million, we still see a $48 million loss for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. And this is, of course, using a much more conservative estimate number for the actual film. Magic Mike's Last Dance still at $39 million in the red, $19 million in the red for 80 for Brady. Not going to change anytime soon. And then the last films that I was actually able to update on the chart were films like Puss in Boots, which continued to add to its profits. Avatar, both of these films getting released in China, by the way. So shame on you. Same also with Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. And let's see, I think that may have been the last film I was actually able to update. And so that is the updated charts. What are y'all's thoughts about this, though? Especially, what are y'all's thoughts about the whole Creed situation? Because I do think that it's interesting that when you are comparing the numbers, right, and you are comparing the fact that the first 2 Creed films had those extra days to make money, saying that Creed 3 is the highest grossing film opening weekend of the franchise, though it is technically correct, it's also leaving out some pretty big key information, right? Those are millions of tickets that you're talking about, just saying, yeah, we're not going to take that into account in its comparison, because here's the thing. There's a good chance that a lot of the people that saw it over the Thanksgiving holiday, that saw it over the Thanksgiving weekend, probably would have ended up going to see it over the weekend had it not gotten an early release. And so that's why it's hard really to say one way or the other, because in one case, you're giving more days to Creed 1 and Creed 2 over Creed 3, and that doesn't seem to be fair. But by the same token, if you're only counting the Friday to Sunday numbers, that also doesn't seem to be fair for Creed 1 and Creed 2 versus Creed 3 because of the fact that it did indeed have an earlier release. Regardless of any of that, though, I do think it is once again showing that the shill media will just always, as just ever, try to create as many narratives as they possibly can. They love to try to get the headlines out there. They try to be able to get all this information out, right, saying it's a game changer and franchise record opening. And I will say this much. It overprojected. It overperformed. It was only projected to make like $40 million, which, I mean, I had a video out saying that was the lowest, expected to be the lowest grossing of the franchise. And I still hold by that, though, because when you, again, adjust these numbers and you take into account things like the holiday weekend and, you know, the fact that you had more money being sold or more money being made, I mean, the numbers end up being pretty close, right? And so I think that these are things that need to be taken into account. And ultimately, I would like to hear your thoughts about this or anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. Also, whether you liked Creed 3 or not. Again, I thought it was boring and pointless, but that is ultimately just me. So let me know your thoughts about this and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you liked the video, smash that like button, like the fire button, and honestly, smash the rumble button as well. Hope you all have a blessed second Sunday of Lent. And yeah, you guys are amazing, beautiful people. I will get my March video recorded as soon as I possibly can. Have not been feeling all that great recently, though, and so I'm a little bit delayed on that. Not too much has changed between last month and this month, but if you are someone where you would have been shouted out, I do apologize for the delay. It will get done as soon as possible. You guys are great. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody, and as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Patreon, locals, and Subscribe Star members who are at the Keeper the Bifrost level and above, starting off with Father Luca Illick, Garrett Searles, Chris from the 80s, who you can check out over on YouTube by the same name, Hymir Irie Hymason, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange Hat Reviews, you can check out at his YouTube channel by the same name as well, Laura, the Modern Major General story, Rosetta Allen, who you can check out at her YouTube channel, Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, which goes by the same name on YouTube. Thank you all very much for supporting me over on Patreon. And also for my Subscribe Star peeps, we got Matt317. Check out his Twitch channel by the same name. Fast Reaction, Mr. Roy, J-Rod the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man, who you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. And a special shout out to the R. And also, lastly, to my locals members, starting off with Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, Brett D90, and the amazing lawyer Robert Barnes. Thank you all very much for supporting me for the month of February. You guys are all fantastic. If you want your name shouted out, access to exclusive podcasts, and exclusive giveaways, check out the top link in the video description below. Anyway, you guys are all great. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. And as always, God bless.